Walking out of the lectures and carrying banners on the streets, students in Egypt demand that their voices be heard. But what is the price of protest? Egypt politics and the country's student movement. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole. The removal of Egypt's first democratically elected president has opened one of the bloodiest chapters in the country's modern history. July's coup that ousted Mohamed Morsi triggered scenes of protests that have become almost a part of daily life for many Egyptians. And many of those on the streets across the country are now students. And they're telling Al Jazeera their universities are in the middle of an uprising. Whether politically aligned or not, they have their demands and say they won't stop until they get what they want. Dina Tosson is in Cairo for us and explains why many students say returning to their lectures isn't an option on the table.
Hi, Yusuf.
Hi. Let's go to my room.
These are busy days for Yusuf Salahin. He's a student union leader at Egypt's oldest seat of learning, Al-Azhar University. Instead of preparing for exams, he says he's fighting against a crackdown by the state.
Al-Azhar University is now in an uprising and in a revolution. And we are not going to stop ever until we reach our aim of freedom and justice for those who have been killed and to bring those criminals to justice and release all innocent people behind jails.
There have been so-called anti-coup protests at Al-Azhar and universities around the country since classes started in October. Ironically, since a law limiting the right to demonstrate came into effect, more people have taken part. In recent days, there's been fighting between students, including a growing number of women, and security forces firing tear gas and birdshot to stop them from marching. Al-Azhar University has been criticised for calling in security forces, but it says it had no choice.
When you find an attack, an assault on a building, and people are using knives and such weapons, so this is a real threat.
Back in October, a group of students broke into Al-Azhar's administrative headquarters, damaging the building. The authorities dealt swiftly, some say harshly, with those taking part.
12 students were convicted of charges including attacking university personnel here and sabotaging private and public property. They were jailed for 17 years. Their colleagues say it's hugely disproportionate and it's just another reason why they're determined to keep on protesting.
Students like Yusuf who take part in the daily demonstrations are a minority, but they insist they're winning over more people all the time.
Lots of students have realized that going to classes is not a solution. Because inside class, you might be killed or detained.
Attitudes are hardening on both sides. But Yusuf sees himself as a defender of a bigger struggle, and there's no sign of him losing heart. Nadeem Barber for Inside Story.
So, we know students have been making their voices heard across campuses nationwide. And while some groups started off with somewhat different demands, there are some demands that they do all agree on. Students Against the Coup are angry about the ousting of former President Mohamed Morsi. The treatment of female protesters has also triggered outrage. The students say they've been assaulted by police and had their hijabs pulled off. Students are also demanding the release of their colleagues from different universities who have been arrested in the last several months. We know of at least 2 students killed in protests, so the demonstrators want an investigation and accountability for those killings. And one demand they don't seem to having much luck with is the call for the resignation of the Minister for Education. This is a major issue, producing issues across the country. Let's introduce our panel to talk about them in Cairo and in London. We've got Dina Tosson. She protested in the June 30th rally that demanded the end of Morsi's presidency. We've got Fawaz Gerges, Professor of Middle East Politics and Director of the Middle East Centre at the LSE, the London School of Economics. We're also joined by Nouran Mostafa Ashoush, who's an economy student and member of the Students Against the Coup movement. So let's start with Dina Tosson. you took part in the June 30th rally that demanded the end of President Morsi's leadership. Why was it so important to you that he should go? You hadn't really given the government very long to achieve anything, had you?
Well, we have respected the elections. We have respected the voting in these elections. And we have seen what have went through the 12 months when Morsi stayed in the presidency. The violence, the economy, and everything the country was going through was would not allow us to give him more time. Over 30 million people went to the streets. I believe this is election. And that's why we had to remove him from the palace and go to new elections, getting someone who can really handle the country.
And Nouran Mostafa Ashoush, you are a student and a member of the Students Against the Coup movement. Is it really up to the students to demonstrate? Is it up to students to call for another change of leadership? Doesn't Egypt now want calm, not more unrest?
Yeah, it's a right for students to go to protest, to go to move in march. This is their rights. She said that they respect the elections. They didn't respect the elections. We go through 5 elections. They didn't respect any of them. She said that the Morsi era has a violence and have something like that. There were only one person who was killed in Morsi's era by the police. He was killed by the police. That we are going marches today against them. More than 5,000 people was killed, and she said that Morsi was the violence in his era. It's not like that, and they didn't respect the elections.
Let's go to Fawaz Gerges. Fawaz, it's 3 years since the end of the 30-year rule of Hosni Mubarak. Now another general appears to be waiting to take power. The prisons are full again. It's no wonder, is it, that the students are on the streets?
Well, I mean, just a historical footnote for your viewers. The university in Egypt has always been a spearhead in dissent in the 1940s and early 1950s against British colonialism and the monarchy. In the 1950s and 60s against President Gamal Abdel Nasser. I mean, he was one of the most popular Arab leaders, and yet the student movement in the 1960s, in particular after the defeat of the 1967 war, basically, made a major migraine for President Gamal Abdel Nasser. In the 1980s and 1990s and early 2000 against President Mubarak. And now, of course, you have major restiveness and protest within the universities against the new order in Egypt. This tells you a great deal about how pivotal the Egyptian university is. And I'm not surprised that the Muslim Brotherhood has shifted its strategy from the streets, from the squares, into the university. What the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to do is to mobilize students to keep its protests alive, and also to make inroads into the non-Muslim Brotherhood students in order to challenge the dominant order in Egypt.
And Nouran Mostafa Ashoush, is the Muslim Brotherhood, Nouran, behind the student demonstrations?
No, they aren't. Muslim Brotherhoods are 25% for the people in the streets now. Students does not hear to anyone nowadays. Most of the people who are killed and most of the people that are behind prison now are from the students, so they will not hear for anyone, even if they are the Muslim Brotherhood. They will go asking for their rights only.
And Dina Tosson, isn't it time that the military, with that, Fawaz explained the history of protest. Students have a right to protest like anybody else, but isn't it time the police moved off the campuses?
Well, Stephen, the police has moved off the campuses a long time ago. But let me just get back to Nora for 2 seconds here. How we did not respect the elections. After the elections, we accepted Morsi as president. But after the acts and after the status the country was getting into, I think the same people who elected Morsi, and even more than that, went to the streets to claim and to say that we were wrong about this guy. It's not the guy we want. That's how people went, and they went peacefully. Now, getting back to the protests in the universities, no one can deny the rights of students for protesting. They have all the rights. No one denied it. But when you go violent, you have to be stopped. Besides, other people, or all the people actually going to this university or that, are going for education. You have to respect that. If you want to protest, why don't you do it after hours, after lectures hours? We do not deny anyone the right to protest and say what they want.
All right, well, let's get response straight away from Nouran to that. The demonstrations are too violent, according to Dina, and if you want to protest, then you've got to do it in your own time, not during lecture time.
She got annoyed from the protests in her university or whatever, and she didn't get annoyed from the picture of blood everywhere, and from the mothers that are seeing their daughters and their sons killed, and the mothers that they didn't see their sons since 4 months because they are behind prison.
May I respond to that?
Yes, of course you respond to that.
Okay, of course I feel for the mothers who cannot see their sons and daughters for 4 months or even more, or the mothers, the parents who saw their children killed in the protests due to the violence made by the protesters. I feel for them, of course, but still you chose to use violence. Tell me, Stephen, if the employees in your organization decide to go on strike or go on protests, you will let them do that. But what if they come to your office, they attack you, they started messing around? Aren't you going to call the security to take them by any way out of the office and out of the building?
Nouran Mostafa Ashoush, do you want to respond to that allegation that the reason the military, the police are involved is because the protests are violent?
Yeah. She's saying that we are violence. It's not like that. I just came now from a march under rain, walking in this raining. We have been 4 months walking in marches. If we are making violence, we don't have to move in these marches. We just go and kill the police and just bring them here and do whatever we want. We don't have to move in marches every day.
Fawaz Gerges, I want to come back to
was killed.
I want to go back to Fawaz first. You've listened to both sides here, Fawaz. What's your take on this?
You know, as you said, as you can hear, I mean, two differing visions, two differing worldview. Egypt is deeply divided. Egypt is traveling a risky journey, full of minefields. I don't think the struggle is over. And what we are witnessing now is basically more escalation and more polarization. The reality is, I mean, regardless of what happens, well, the reality is, I mean, you have a legitimately elected president who was basically, replaced, overthrown by the military order, even though there were millions of Egyptians who resented and who fully disagreed with his leadership. But the reality is, regardless of the mistakes committed and made by President Mohamed Morsi, that he was one of the first legitimately elected president in modern Egyptian history. You cannot deny the reality, regardless of what you think of the Muslim Brotherhood and President Mohamed Morsi. The question on the table is, how do you move forward? How do you, basically bridge the divide between your two guests, which basically this tells you about Egypt itself? Of course, the military authorities are moving forward with a new particular order, referendum on the new constitution. But this cannot obscure the fact, regardless of what happened the morning after the referendum, Egypt will most likely remain divided, and Egyptians will remain deeply polarized, and this does not bode well for either political transition and democracy or even economic and social development in Egypt.
Nouran Mostafa Ashoush, is it indeed time now to halt the protests, to halt the demonstrations, because they are becoming dangerous, if for no other reason?
No, you're saying that we have to continue and looking for tomorrow. We cannot do that. We cannot close our eyes for what happened, for the bloody picture we have. We have 2 students that was killed last week in the campus inside the university. We cannot close our eyes on this picture. We will continue. No constitution under the military coup. We are not saying that he is the president. We cannot go for referendum or for constitution under this. We have our own constitution.
What are your objections then?
Yes,
if you want to continue protesting, what are your objections to the referendum to begin with?
I don't say that he is the president to go for this referendum. I cannot do that.
But a referendum is a view of the people, isn't it? Isn't the referendum the first stage of this democratic transition? Or promised by this interim government? Shouldn't you be going down that road, the constitutional road?
That's not a democratic transition. We cannot say the 2 words beside each other. No military coup, no democracy under the military coup. That's no.
And Dina Tosson, your response to that?
Well, let me answer to Fawaz first. He said that that's the deep difference in point of view in Egypt now. If we're talking about the protests, then there is no objection. I do not object the protests. Like Nouran said, she said, we have been doing marches for 4 months now. I don't think they have been attacked during those marches as long as they were peaceful. Sometimes they were not peaceful and they did not been attacked, and they have not been attacked either. But moving these protests to the universities, it's what makes the government interfere, the police or the security. They have to interfere. This is not the place for protests. We don't have difference in point of view here. The protests have to be peaceful and in the rightful place.
All right, well, you've made your point that they have to be peaceful. We'll go to Fawaz, and then I want to go to Nouran again for her response.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Egyptians of all political persuasions have earned the right to protest, have earned the right to bark, have earned the right to congregate and perform the public spaces, whether they are in squares or at universities. The university in Egypt, again, to come back, played a key role in basically toppling President Anwar Sadat in the late 1970s. The university cannot be silenced as long as the protests are peaceful. And I believe most of the protesters are peaceful. Let's remember here, let's be blunt here, and I'm talking as a person who knows a bit about Egypt. The police in Egypt cannot be trusted to say that the protesters are violent. We know their heavy-handed tactics and mechanics.
That's the point I wanted to point to Nouran, because there have been some heavy-handed tactics, not least the harassment of female students, Nouran.
Okay, female students, we have an example. For the last 3 days, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, we saw Azhar girls, how they stand in front of the police. We saw how the police and army forces stand in front of them, throwing on them rocks, throwing on them, they spread on them spicy powder on their faces. I saw girls that push their faces on the wall from the hurt. They saw gases that eat their faces. That only was the girls, not the boys. They attacked the protest of the girls also.
Dina Tosson, in any kind of democracy, people are held accountable. Will these kind of incidents go unpunished? Will they be investigated?
Well, we have courts for that, and we have law for that. We have, Egypt is the state of institutions, so whoever has a claim, he can go to the court. This is one point. The other point, let me get to your guest. She's saying that girls and girl students have been hurt during the protest. That's what happens in protests there. We have seen the protest in London and in Wall Street and what happened there. And that's how protests go. And the police, if they wanted to use violence, or if they mean to use violence with the protesters, they would use real violence, not just gas bombs and hurting powder or spicy powder on their faces. That's for just to dismiss them.
Fawaz, do you want to come into this? Because
yes,
basically
yes.
Dina is saying it's a sort of collateral damage of demonstrations that some female students will be attacked or assaulted.
It should not be either female or male. That's not the question. I think the question is, and I'm being here very direct, there has been a widespread violations of human rights, not just students' rights, in Egypt in the last few months. Many violations, and this is really a great disservice to this great country, Egypt, one of the most peaceful countries in the Arab world. Egypt, the Egyptian people are well known for their decency, their respect for human life, and what we are seeing in Egypt is very alarming. This particular really radicalization that's taking place in Egypt. At the end of the day, you two guests, speak volumes about how polarized Egypt is without a deep process of engagement, of consultation, of debates, without trying to repair the damage among the various political groups. I fear that, as I said earlier, that Egypt's road is very risky and really littered with minefields.
And Nouran Mostafa, how could the students contribute to repairing the damage and try and bring Cairo, indeed Egypt, closer together?
That's not the role of the students. The students' role now, they go and set down the military coup. That's not their role. This role is the role of the government. They have to see what the students want, and they have to admit it. They have to do it.
Dina Tosson, that's the challenge, isn't it, for the government, the one that Fawaz told us about there, to bring the country together. They're hoping that the referendum and a new constitution might do that, but in the short term, the country is bitterly divided, isn't it?
The country is not divided, Stephen. That's what they keep saying. But the country is not divided. The country has, most of the people in this country want to move forward. They want to go back to a stable country with strong institutions. We want to move forward. We want the economics to go back strong again, people to go back to their jobs, to their work, and to find something to feed their children by the end of the day. Now what's happening in the universities, I'm not saying that it's major or that it is affecting our lives in any way, but for the people living around these universities and the people who have jobs there, they are totally stopping their work. They cannot get to their work. They cannot get to their universities. They cannot get to their lives. They are totally stopped. But let me get back to Fawaz here. He said that the police is not trusted for the violence, what they show that the students are doing some violence or some. We all saw it on TVs, Fawaz. I am living in Egypt. If you know something about Egypt, as you said, but I am living in Egypt. We all saw it on TV.
All right, you don't think Fawaz is right? In the few seconds we've got left, Fawaz, you better defend yourself.
Well, it's not about me. It's about many human rights reports. It's about international organizations. It's about images that speak volumes of the radicalization that has taken place in Egypt, of the violation of human rights. Regardless of the causes, Egypt should move forward, but together, all Egyptians. And this is why a deep, long process of reconciliation and engagement and inclusion, that's the only way that Egypt can move forward toward democracy and pluralism.
Let's hope so. And thank you, Dina Tosson, Nouran Mostafa Ashoush and Fawaz Gerges for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to, send us your feedback by email to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks again for watching. From me, Stephen Cole. Goodbye for now.